Prime Minister Boris Johnson has voiced concerns about rising cases of coronavirus in some European countries.
I'm afraid you are starting to see, in some places, the signs of a second wave of the pandemic.
So, is the PM right to be worried?
It's too early to say whether we're on the brink of a second wave across Europe. Obviously, there are worrying signs that in certain places, certain parts of mainland Europe, that there's an increase in coronavirus infections, in particular northeast Spain around Catalonia. But whether or not that then pans out to be more widespread is difficult to predict at the moment. So at the moment, wherever there are significant outbreaks in Europe, wherever outbreaks occur, Germany, Italy, for example, because of the extensive testing, because there's a lot of tracing going on, then they can bring these outbreaks under control quite quickly, and so they stay fairly localized. If we look back at the first wave, what happened is in various countries you started to see a rapid escalation of cases. And of course, if you compare what happened back in February, March time with what's happening now in Spain, that's why people are wondering if it is the start of a second wave, and this time Spain is leading rather than Italy. But at the moment, the case numbers are nowhere near what we saw happening very, very quickly in Italy. And I think that's why it's probably best to be cautious. But I think, you have to also be realistic, and the Spanish authorities have to get on top of the outbreaks as and when they occur, because we know the virus can transmit incredibly well.
Over the weekend, the UK government removed Spain from its list of travel corridor destinations, leaving holidaymakers in the country's tourism hotspots in the lurch.
It was just like that kind of anxiety, really, of like you're trying to have like a nice trip and stuff away, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, I have to contact work and hear back from them.
Professor Ball says the government's careful approach is the correct way forward if we're to avoid another crisis.
I think it's sensible to be very cautious. What we know from the first wave of infections that struck really hard in the United Kingdom was that in the early parts of February, around sort of half-term time, we know that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of introductions of the virus into the United Kingdom. And these didn't come from Southeast Asia, which is where most of the monitoring was going on. It also didn't come from places like the 10 towns in northern Italy, which were also on the list of suspect or high case locations. They came from various parts of Europe, probably around the Alps, and unfortunately that very quickly spread throughout the United Kingdom and caused the problems that we saw. So you have to be cautious, because until you can be reassured that they know exactly the numbers, case numbers that are circulating in different parts of Spain, you have to assume the worst. We've been bitten once before, and we're well aware of the likelihood or the risk of virus being imported into the United Kingdom without us realizing. And if we think back to the first wave, the isolation and quarantine measures that we introduced to people returning from high-risk areas were incredibly effective. And unfortunately, what happened is that the virus came into the United Kingdom from places that we thought were relatively low risk. And I think, the reality is that our borders are vulnerable. We are vulnerable to importation of virus. As long as we don't trace and track the virus and monitor any outbreaks that might occur in the United Kingdom. And of course, things like closing the easy travel from those places at a high risk and ensuring that quarantine and isolation occurs for travellers who've returned from those places, then that all helps.